Previously on the Electric Underground
game, which is $25. Now this is where it gets tough because, like I said earlier, Rayforce is a classic of the genre. I consider it gold standard, easy recommend to all shmup players. There's no question of that in my mind. It's just a question of, is this port excellent? And that's where I think you're gonna have to do a little bit of your own consumer interpretation here, because personally speaking, I will not buy this when it comes out, the $25, because of the input lag and because of the price tag. I would rather just play it on the Saturn or play it on emulator for people who want to play it on.
Hello everyone, welcome to my review of the latest M2 shmup collection, the RayZ Arcade Chronology. And I am sure M2 want me to pronounce this as RayZ Arcade Chronology, like many of their other misguided titles, but I refuse to play your games, M2. Ray sounds like the guy who fixes my car.
Ray, the guy who pours my beer.
So let's call this the RayZ Arcade Chronology. And before I even begin the review, let's clear the slate. Let's make sense of what's going on here, because I nearly missed this collection because of all the confusion of all the different versions and ports and all these different developers and publishers. What the f is going on? So let me clear the slate. Last year, I reviewed the Rayforce Layer Section Tribute Collection Extravaganza, whatever the hell it was called, by City Connection. That port, like I said in my review, was a port of the Sega Saturn version of Rayforce, which was unnecessarily laggy and also a port of a port. I said in that review, I'm sure, and I've said in the Batsugun review, that no, let's go for the direct source material. Let's get a port of the arcade version. And so that version has finally arrived, or actually arrived a few months ago, with the RayZ Arcade Chronology, done by M2 themselves. And because of how confusing these releases have become, even I, probably one of the biggest M2 fans out there, did not pick up on this release. I assumed it was another City Connection slapped together job of like, oh, here's our Rayforce, here's some other crap, here you go. Because all the marketing, all the promotional material, none of it specifies that the developer is M2. So I assumed it was City Connection, but no. So this RayZ Arcade Chronology is a distinctive, different port and a much better port than the previous Rayforce port by City Connection. To make this even more confusing, you think that's confusing, make this even more confusing, the reason why I know about this is because there's an upcoming release of the RayStorm RayCrisis HD Collection, or whatever the hell they're calling it. Well, what is that? Well, what that is the RayZ Arcade Collection, oh my god, these titles, that I'm reviewing today, but without Rayforce. Like, what the hell are you guys doing? So let's get this all cleared up right away. Before we even talk about the review, the correct game to buy, the port you want to buy, is the port I am discussing in today's video, the RayZ Arcade Chronology. Because the previous version, the City Connection port, the Tribute one, that one sucks. And then the upcoming one, the RayStorm RayCrisis HD Collection, is just this collection without Rayforce, which is the dumbest idea I have ever heard. That's like releasing the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but without the Fellowship of the Ring. Let's just give you the Two Towers and Return of the King, but forget Fellowship. And also, the price point on the upcoming RayStorm RayCrisis release doesn't even make sense, because if you buy the RayZ Arcade Chronology, the whole thing, which I think is definitely worth $50, you're getting a solid value there. But with the RayStorm RayCrisis HD Collection that they're redoing, they're charging $40. So in this equation, Rayforce, the best of the three games, is worth $10? I understand that what Einin or M2 are trying to do is to bring awareness back to the collection by releasing alternate versions of it, and you know, it did kind of work, but now it's so confusing and such a hot mess that people are getting lost. So let me set the record straight. Just buy this version. So with all that being said, let's actually review this collection. In the world of shmups, it is very easy to find games that you would consider underrated or overlooked or undervalued. Basically all shmups could fall into that category except Ikaruga. However, in my opinion, even among shmup fans, Rayforce has a very strong claim to being one of the most underrated shmups out there. This game, besides just being incredibly good, is also very influential on a lot of stuff that came out after it. With its lock-on system, with the way it presents itself, with all its crazy naming schemes, I mean, it was ahead of its time. So Rayforce, in my opinion, is one of those must-own shmup titles. However, coming into this review, I actually had not played RayStorm or RayCrisis. I know they're available on the PlayStation and I had it on my list to do it, but I hadn't broken out my PlayStation yet. These games are also incredibly cool because they're doing some stuff that I think modern shmups could learn from. I kind of talked about it in my Terror Diver review, but what they're doing is they're taking the 3D aspect of the PlayStation super seriously, and at some point after the PlayStation era, shmups kind of gave up on doing this, but this era of shmups to me is incredibly fascinating because it is borderline a rail shooter. It is damn close to being a rail shooter. It's not, but the way it's playing with perspective, the way it's doing all this great background work, the way it's moving things along, I love the old school 3D styling of it. So I fully recommend all 3 games. I think this is one of those solid collections where every game in the collection is actually good and actually worth getting. So it's not just Rayforce with 2 extras thrown in. RayStorm and RayCrisis are great games unto themselves. I just think it's really stupid for the publisher to separate them out from Rayforce and then only give you a $10 discount. If they wanted to do that, they should charge you like 20 bucks. But with these collections though, in my opinion, they live and die by the quality of the port itself. Like in my last video where I talked about the delivery boy analogy. Yes, we all know that the source material is good, but can you deliver the source material to us in a honorable fashion, in a fashion that is respectful, and also in a fashion that competes with unofficial emulation? I know all the other reviewers in the world like to pretend that unofficial emulation doesn't exist, but it does. And it is a factor you're going to have to compete against to sell a product, because we live in the real world, not the magical world that game developers and game publishers and game journalists like to pretend that we live in. So let's talk about the specific features of the port. Because this is a collection, I don't expect it to be full-on M2 shot triggers level stuff where we're getting highly customizable modes and ranges and all that. I do accept that because they've collected 3 games together, that they're going to basically be giving you the source material, but they're not going to give you too many extras. But at the price point of 50 bucks and 3 games, so that's understandable, but how well done is the source material? Luckily, because M2 have this long legacy of porting shmups, I think they have built on and improved their own process over the years, and that's what's made them such a strong company for porting games. For example, you go in, you got all the good game options, extend settings, all the stuff that you get on the PCB. And then you go in, you've got all the standards for the screen orientation, you've got pixel perfect. And I think if people play on CRTs and have scalers, I think that's what pixel perfect is for. If you play on LCD monitors, you've got fit to screen. That's what I do, fit to screen. Then you've got full screen, which I do not recommend you use unless you have some kind of crazy setup that you need it for. But for the most part, fit to screen is what I go with. They do have a scanline option, which is really nice. Unfortunately, it's not like the shot triggers scanline option though, where you can adjust the intensity of the scanlines, because I personally like a light scanline. And so this scanline option, I think it looks pretty good on Rayforce, but on the PS1 games, I think it's too heavy and too dark. So I wish they would add an ability to adjust the intensity of the scanline, but if you're into darker scanlines, they do have that. Smoothing, don't even bother with it, at least in my opinion. But they've got all the options there, all the things you're looking for, and of course screen rotation for playing in Tate. And then controller config, M2 are leading the way with their controller config options, because what I really like about it is not only can you map the same input to different buttons, but you also can give each individual input different auto fire settings, and they're going all out on the different types of auto fire settings. So that is nice having that adjustable. And then with the sound options, nothing too great here. I wish they had the ability to change the volume of the sound effects like they do in the shot triggers ports. Not only because sometimes you get sick of hearing the sound effects, or if you want to change out the background music but keep the sound effect, but also it's kind of a tricky, fun way to rip video game soundtracks. If you turn down the sound effects and then just have the soundtrack playing, you can record the soundtrack and rip it that way. Maybe shmup developers are starting to pick up on that. I don't know, but sadly, no sound effects volume. On Rayforce, what they did with the sound options is they allowed you to tune out some of the background noise of the arcade board, because the arcade board of Rayforce sounds a little noisy if you listen to soundtrack rips of that. And then with the PS1 games, you do have an arranged soundtrack option in there. This is all solid standard stuff, but let's talk about one of the big selling points of this collection, which is its replay and online leaderboards. Because this is stuff you can't get in unofficial emulation. Because in unofficial emulation, yes, you can have replays, and that's really cool, but what you don't get is a really comprehensive online leaderboard with replays attached. And what's really cool about these PS4 versions, and why I bought the PS4 version of this game, is because you can get Japanese players participating on these leaderboards, and you can watch their replays, and you can watch replays of super players right there on your console. For example, you're watching the background footage, the B-roll of this review, and you're like, damn, Mark's kicking some serious ass. Well, actually, I downloaded and played back Airpo's top replay of Rayforce, where he's kicking some serious ass compared to everyone else on the leaderboard. And so this stuff is what I really love about the M2 ports, is because you can get top Japanese players and Western players duking it out on the same game, on the same hardware, on the same leaderboard. And this is where you get stuff like Moglar getting the world record in Ketsui, because he can play against SPS in Japan. Whereas with the non-built-in leaderboards, we all have our own little separate high score places that we post things, but we don't post them in the same place directly head-to-head. The only way you get that is if it is built into the game. And so that is one big selling point of this release for me. So that is really cool and not something you see in collections often. Usually if you want that, you have to buy the full-on premium Shot Triggers release, which is worth it, but it is really cool to have it for 3 games, because now you can see top level plays of RayStorm and RayCrisis, which probably aren't all that prevalent and easy to hunt down, and you can just download them and watch them right on the console. I think that aspect of shmup ports is really cool and something more developers should be looking into, because it can create a competitive environment for a game that would be hard to have one otherwise. And then there are the save states. I opened up the save state tab with a bit of nervousness because I was scared I would scroll down and end at 10 slots, which I do not want this to become a trend. We need more save states, people. So luckily, yes, we have 36 slots, and I do really appreciate the sort of thumbnails next to the save states. This is something actually was included in RetroArch, by the way. So now when you do save state, you can see, okay, where the hell is this save state? Because when you start building on a bunch of save states and doing a bunch of save state practice with just the numbers, or even with just like the timestamps, like on the Shot Trigger sports, it is sometimes confusing. Okay, where is the actual save state? So having the little thumbnails there is a really nice addition. And then there's the main selling point for a lot of people, which are the HD versions of RayStorm and RayCrisis. Now, I will admit, when I opened up the HD versions of these games, I wasn't thrilled with them, because I personally like the PS1 era 3D graphics better, because they have more texture to them. They have a little bit more of an edge to them. Whereas the newer HD graphics, they feel overly clean to me, if that makes sense. They feel a little bit sterile. That being said though, as I played the HD graphics more, they do have one really big benefit, which is hard to deny, which is bullet visibility. Because when I was playing the PS1 era graphics and stuff, it looks great, at least in my opinion. I love the way it looks, but there's times where I'm flying around and I just explode. I'm like, what the hell happened? Whereas with the HD version, you can see, oh, there's the bullet. It really cleans up bullet visibility. So ironically, if you're probably playing competitively or you're trying to play for a high score, you're probably gonna wanna play on the HD versions just for pure bullet visibility. And I do like that the collection has both versions. So if you don't want to do the HD, you can do the original PS1 style graphics, which I prefer visually. But if you don't want to do those, you can go HD. So I really like that they allowed you to do both. I think a lot of lesser ports or collections would just throw the original graphics in the garbage and go with these shiny new HD graphics. Oh, look at this. But I am glad that M2 delivered both versions of the graphics and each have their strength. I could also see the HD version being really good for playing in handheld mode on the Switch, because you're already battling visibility on the Switch because the screen is tiny. So having as clear a view as possible on the Nintendo Switch in handheld mode, I think the HD versions of the graphics are going to be the way to go there. What's also really cool is that this is a good collection for the Nintendo Switch for two big reasons. The first reason is that RayStorm and RayCrisis are 4x3, so playing them on the Switch, because there's no Tate involved, is going to be much more comfortable, because playing Switch games in Tate, I know the flip grip and everything's supposed to solve that, but in my opinion, it's just too much of a pain. So being that they're 4x3, that's a great deal for the Switch to begin with. And then secondly, because they have the built-in replay systems, even locally, that's a big deal, because a problem with playing on the Switch in handheld mode is, let's say you get a really good run on handheld mode. I actually have a time or two, but the Switch has no ability to record anything. You're obviously playing in handheld mode, so you're not hooked up to a capture card or anything. And so those runs and replays are just lost in the void of time, unless you have a built-in replay system, because what you can do is you can get the run in handheld mode, save the replay, stick it in your dock, and then capture it. And so for Switches specifically, local replays are a really big deal. So far, home run, right? It's got save states, it's got replays, it's got online leaderboards, it's got a selection of 3 really good games, it's even got HD versions of the graphics for some of the games. So on paper, everything is just what it should be, but then there's the big question mark, the killer of shmup collections, the input lag. Because the scary thing is that usually when you get a shmup collection, or a collection of any arcade games, doesn't have to be shmups, they tend to be laggy bastards, because what the developers tend to do is they want to have like a universal solution to emulating all the games. And usually that creates lag in some way or another. Just look at the Turtles collection, just look at the MegaMan collection, just like any arcade game collection, they tend to be laggy bastards. What I love about M2, and why M2 are my favorite developer publisher currently working, is because whenever I am more critical of City Connection, or the Turtles collection, or MegaMan collection, even though I didn't review it on the channel, I was pretty pissed about that, is that whenever you discuss shortcomings with performance and input lag and features for these collections, the number one defense you will often read in the comments over and over again, just look at my Nintendo Life reviews for the Psikyo ports, just look at any of my reviews, is that people will say, well, these standards are unreasonable. These standards are not something commercial developers can live up to. They just can't do it. It's impossible. If you want modern ports of stuff, it has to be a laggy piece of shit. That just has to happen because of economics and finances. Except a little company called M2, because check this out. I went ahead and input lag tested all 3 games and also the HD versions of the games. So we got Rayforce, RayStorm HD, RayStorm Normal, RayCrisis HD, RayCrisis Normal. And across the board, across all 5 versions of these games, I came out with approximately 2 frames of input lag. I say approximately because the PlayStation 4 cannot connect to a CRT, so I had to connect it up to my gaming monitor. And when I X out the lag from my gaming monitor, which is 1 frame, you end up with 2 frames of input lag across all the games, across all their versions, consistently 2 frames, which is super impressive on a PlayStation 4. And what's super crazy is that when I was doing the input lag analysis, I never saw a response over 3 frames, because remember, I get an extra frame of lag from my gaming monitor. Nothing was ever above 3 frames on my gaming monitor, but there were samples that were lower, that were 2 frames on my gaming monitor. So it's either 2 frames or possibly even a bit lower than 2 frames, but whatever the margin of error is, it is definitely around that 2 frame area, and it is miles ahead of the competition, and it feels incredible. It feels responsive. And so if you left me a comment on that Rayforce tribute review where I critiqued the input lag and you said, you know what, I don't even feel the input lag. I don't even notice the input lag. Well, now you have the chance to do a bit of a Pepsi challenge. So fire up the Rayforce Tribute Collection on your PS4, and then fire up the RayZ Arcade Chronology on your PS4, and just play them back to back. And then see, does this feel a little bit different? Is there something better about the RayZ Arcade Chronology that makes the game feel and play better? Now you can directly compare the two. It is so delightful for me as a reviewer to have a counterpoint to the City Connection port, which is laggy, and I can only hope that we get another counterpoint from M2 for Batsugun. Wouldn't that be fun? So I hope you all enjoyed this review. Top tier recommendation for me. Seal of approval for days. And this is not a sponsored review. I had to pay for this version of the collection out of pocket because the RayStorm RayCrisis version, which I did get a review key, is missing Rayforce. So what the So basically the publishers are promoting the wrong version of the game, which is classic shmup stuff. Please like, subscribe, tell all your friends. Adios, everyone.
So thank you to the $5 patrons, 100, Accepting Panda, Admiral Coconut, Arnold, Alexander Pfeiffer, Dingo, Anthony A, Arcade Hell, Arrow Viper, Beam Pit, Bo, Ben, Vito Dames, Borgie22, Brian Romano, Ryan Shiver, Bush and Cat, Chase Palumbo, Chattel Maltese, Chris Yusufovich, Chronic Burnout 3, Clara Cliff, Climby Coyote, Coast, Colorboy, Cookstand666, Cooks and Soup, Corey Mark, Des Audio, Dan Chi, Darren Griffin, Dave Hansen, David Crespo, Delta Tango 6, Disco Stas Leia, DJ420, Praise It, Elias, FCK, Frames Per Human, Francisco, Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Hausu, Jake Ryan, JLab, JB RPG, John Kelly, Game Boy Guru, K, K2, Khalil Reedy, Contain, Praise the Boys, K-Horse, Low Casting, Malaise, Matt O'Leary, Maz, Megadeth 859, Minung, Mecklin, Michael McCord, Mitchell Y, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, Neon Dagger Games, Oakland Kugels, Oxated, Pedro, Philip Mason, Psycho Blizzard, Rattlecat, Raul, Real Skeen, Riff Mason, Rolf015, Scanline City, Seesaw FW, Shmup Junkie, Sarah Pong, Steve Fiction, Street Magic, Superfunk, SW1335, Demzarian, Takara Mucho, Taze, The Boot Rex, The Dirty Screech, The N1, The Old Bensta, TRM, Sugumo, 2YU, Twilight EX, Unikoi Roots, Bog Hog, Vic Viper, Beautiful, Wabby Legs, Utakaya, Zachary Patton, Zeal. Thanks so much, everyone.